Hello and welcome to this edition of Shalom World's Heart Talk. I'm Graziano Marcheski, and we are in Kalamazoo, as the Native Americans call this part of Michigan. Kalamazoo means boiling river, inspired by the rapids in the waters that made the river look like it was boiling. Well, we are here in Kalamazoo, Michigan, to speak with their local shepherd, Bishop Paul J. Bradley. Bishop Bradley, thank you so much for making this time to speak with Shalom World.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm happy to be here with you.
You've been the bishop of Kalamazoo for almost 9 years now. Tell us about the transition. You came here from Pittsburgh, is that right?
I did. I was a priest in Pittsburgh for 40-some years now. That I've been ordained in 1971. But in 2005, the Holy Father appointed me auxiliary bishop in Pittsburgh, and I served there with Bishop Earl at the time, that was still the Bishop of Pittsburgh. And then he went to Washington, and I remained as administrator of the diocese there in Pittsburgh for another year and a half. And then I was appointed to come here in 2009, June of 2009.
So what are some of the major differences that you immediately detected coming from Pittsburgh to Michigan?
Well, Pittsburgh, of course, is it's an old diocese. It's been around for a long time. Kalamazoo is a relatively new diocese. This diocese was established the same year I was ordained a priest.
Oh, wow.
And whereas in Pittsburgh, the church is an established, active participant in the life of the community, I think here in Kalamazoo, the church is more or less in a minority among the mostly other Protestants in the area, a large concentration of Dutch Reformed people here in this area. And I think the church still has certainly a place of respect, but it's a kind of that's a major difference that I've found. There's also in Pittsburgh established neighborhoods and an identity with the church, where here in Kalamazoo, I think that's something we're still working on. That's a major item that I really am trying to get a sense of, that we're a diocese throughout the 9 counties of this area.
You also have a large, diverse population, Native Americans, Latino. Talk about your efforts to include those diverse populations in the life of the diocese.
Sure. The Native American influence goes all the way back to when Kalamazoo was founded hundreds of years ago. In fact, the name Kalamazoo is a Native American name, which means bubbling river. And it came from the river that was flowing through the area.
Yeah.
So it's the Potawatomi Native Americans that were for hundreds of years very Catholic in their origin, in their practice. And in fact, one of the great Potawatomi Indians leaders walked from this part of Michigan all the way to Detroit twice, begging the bishop there to send priests, or what he called black robes, and to come and minister to the Potawatomi Native Americans here. So yes, they're still present, of course, in this area. Their Catholic roots, I think, have evolved a bit, but it's very much a part of our heritage. The Hispanic influence is it's relatively new in the sense that this whole area is very, very big into fruits and vegetables. And so the migrant workers come here from all different parts of the country to work during the summertime. But there's also an established group of Hispanic people now that live here all the time. So that was the biggest challenge, to really try to continue to make sure that we're all a part of the church.
Well, let's go back a bit. You mentioned that you were ordained in 1971. When did you first start discerning priesthood? How did you know that God was calling you to this life?
I was blessed to grow up in a large family, a large Catholic family. I'm one of 8 children. That was in the late 40s and early 50s when I was growing up. And the church was strong and vibrant, and being a priest and a sister in those days was it was just a normal way of pursuing one's life, and it wasn't, as it is today, kind of an unusual when somebody considers a religious vocation. In those days, it was very common. There were lots of priestly vocations. I went to a Catholic school, and the sisters, of course, talked a lot about the importance of the life of a priest. We were very active in the local parish, and it just became almost just a natural response for me. I wasn't so much encouraged, but I grew up having a sense of the importance of that vocation. And it's certainly one that I was inclined to as an altar server at Mass as I was growing up. And so, it just seemed like the normal thing for me to do, and I have loved it ever since.
So it wasn't a struggle. It wasn't a sense of, I'm giving up. There was more of a sense of what you were embracing.
Well, certainly when I entered into the seminary and began the formation process, it was exciting. Over the course of those years, you go through those normal should I, shouldn't I, which is really what discernment is all about. But yes, there was never a sense that it was so much what I was not going to have as much as what I was going to be privileged to be able to do.
Talk about the influence on you of the domestic church, of the family that you grew up in. How did they help to make you the man that you were when you became a priest?
We grew up in a small town. My dad was a worker in the steel mill. We were certainly middle-class family. We were not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. The family has been very important to me. They influenced me in the sense of just seeing faith lived day in and day out in the ways that we lived together and decisions that my parents made.
As all bishops do, you have a personal coat of arms, and yours is especially interesting and beautiful, I find.
Thank you.
We'll be putting it on the screen so our viewers can see it. A coat of arms is meant to reflect the person that it represents. So talk to us about some of the imagery, some of the symbolism within your coat of arms and what it means.
Of course, if we're seeing the coat of arms that is the diocesan coat of arms, the dioceses coat of arms is on the left, as we know. The personal coat of arms is on the right. So in my own coat of arms, the M at the top of the coat of arms represents a number of different things, primarily my devotion to the Blessed Mother. I also was very blessed to receive all of my seminary formation at St. Meinrad, Indiana. And that was a great place for me to grow spiritually as well as throughout my formation. So the M also recalls those 12 years of being at St. Meinrad.
Yeah.
And the M also for me represents the importance of my own mother and father. So it pulls in the family connection. So it's the Blessed Mother and my growth and the importance of my family.
That's rich.
Yeah, the middle of the field are three wavy blue lines, which represents my home, Pittsburgh, because as we sometimes know, Pittsburgh is referred to as the Three Rivers, where the Ohio is formed out of the Youghiogheny and Monongahela rivers. And so it just represents the church from which I've come, and that's the Diocese of Pittsburgh. And then the bottom part of the coat of arms shows two hands interlocked, which to me represents the journey of faith that we are all on, that we go to God not as individuals, but as a community, and that represents the journey of faith that we continue to be on.
What is the significance of the peace pipe?
Well, the peace pipe would be a part of the diocesan coat of arms.
I see.
And that's on the left, and that too is in the middle of the left side of the field. The peace pipe and the bubbles, that comes from the Kalamazoo River.
Okay.
And the peace pipe represents the Potawatomi influence, the influence of the Native Americans here in this part of the country.
Well, you mentioned your devotion to the Blessed Mother, and I find that many bishops talk about that. You know, most faithful Catholics have a relationship with the Blessed Mother. It would be hard to imagine someone who was a strong, faithful Catholic and didn't have that component. You also talk a lot about hope. I see that running through as a theme. It's in your diocesan vision statement. It's in your own personal motto. And I sense a connection between hope and the Blessed Mother. Am I on to anything here?
The Blessed Mother, I think, is absolute trust in the Lord. When she was asked to do something that was even beyond her own comprehension, while she asked for some clarification, she immediately said, "Let it be done to me," as you say. That total gift of self, that wasn't just a one-time yes or fiat, but it was an attitude that she portrayed and demonstrated throughout her life, and that she continues as our intercessor now in heaven, as our primary intercessor, to continue to guide us always to Jesus, to be able to say yes to him in whatever it is that we're asked to do, because of the great hope that we place in the Lord, that he's never going to lead us astray.
In your recent Christmas message, you alluded to Mary's fiat and asked that the people of your diocese pray that they might be able to say yes the way that she did. Can you point to a time in your life when you had to say yes kind of blindly, where you had to accept the will of the Lord in a situation where maybe you wouldn't have gone on your own?
Well, coming to Kalamazoo, I mean, truly, I think every bishop, when he gets that phone call from the apostolic nuncio, I mean, that's an act of absolute, total fiat.
Yeah.
It's some people, I think, might not exactly understand how bishops become bishops. I've had people ask me, "What did you apply?" or things of that nature. Well, no, you just you're busy taking care of your responsibilities until one day you get a phone call, and that's exactly what happened to me. And the Apostolic Nuncio says the Holy Father would like to appoint you to be the Bishop of Kalamazoo. So again, in kind of as the Blessed Mother did, you might ask, where's Kalamazoo, for one thing, or kind of clarifications, but the answer, needs to be, of course, whatever I'm asked to do, I'll be glad to do. So I think that's probably the most dramatic time in my life when I've been asked to do that. But even going back from one parish assignment to another, when the bishop asks you to go to a new assignment, you typically don't barter or negotiate or say, well, how about someplace else? The response is supposed to be, sure, I'll be glad to do that. And that was what my response was throughout my life. There were many times I'd have to say that I wasn't so sure about this particular assignment. I always found, however, that once I got there, it was beyond a wonderful experience for me.
When you first arrived here in your first year, you made it a goal to visit all the parishes and all the schools. 46 parishes, is
59.
that? 59. And 20-some schools.
20 schools.
How did that help you to assume the responsibility of being the shepherd of this diocese, visiting all those parishes?
I remember when I came here for the announcement that I was to be the new bishop. It was in April of 2009. And I remember flying into Kalamazoo, and flying over this territory, and you say, okay, this is now my new home. This is now my responsibility in terms of being the shepherd. It was an interesting way to first see the diocese from the sky. But as we know, that doesn't really give you a whole lot of detail. And so one of the first things being really, in a sense, a total stranger at that time. There's no, how can I be the shepherd of priests and people until I get to know them? And so that became the most important priority for me, to be able to get to visit every parish as soon as I possibly could. And we were able to do that within a year. But it then gave me that sense that at least I've been everywhere. I know basically what I need to be thinking about and what the needs of the people are. That was the primary thing, to listen to the people at each of those places and to say, what are your concerns and how can we address them together?
Yeah. You've had a number of opportunities to meet the Holy Father. You even celebrated Mass with him at Casa Santa Marta.
Yes.
Give us your impressions of the Holy Father.
I happened to be in Rome the month after Pope Francis was elected in 2013. Mm-hmm. And he was, I think, might have been one of the first bishops that he got to meet, and that I was privileged to be able to meet him in one of his first audiences. Every time I've met him since, he just has that ability to look at you, and even though you're surrounded by thousands, literally, of other people, his focus is on each individual that he's speaking to. It wasn't me, but when I was speaking with him, his focus was on me. So I was always impressed with his ability to be present to the people, to the person, to the situation that he deals with. Since then, of course, all of his beautiful writings, I think, have demonstrated what an amazingly insightful priest, bishop, Holy Father he is, helping us all to really come to love Jesus. And I think that's his primary message, that we really need to, faith is important, and we need to make sure that we know our faith, but he keeps challenging us to be in love with Jesus and to follow him in our lives. And I think that's the message that I keep trying to communicate here in our diocese as well.
This past summer, you attended a significant event in Orlando, Florida. It was a convocation sponsored by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Mm-hmm. Tell us what that experience was like, to be with so many church leaders from all over the country, and anything that you may have learned or wanted to bring back to your diocese to inform your ministry.
Once I got there and experienced it, it was more than I could have imagined. It was a wonderful experience. We were able to take 8 people with us from our diocese. Each diocese was asked to bring a delegation of people. And so that was a nice size group for our diocese to be able to be there. And to see the enormity of this gathering of cardinals, bishops, priests, deacons, religious, lay faithful, from every part of the country and beyond, representing most every diocese and so many different groups and institutions and movements within the church. That was the biggest thing, I think, what was so impressive, to see the church in miniature here, all of these people together, and in love with the Lord. That was the constant message. It was called the joy of the gospel. It was taking the Holy Father's apostolic exhortation on the joy of the gospel and really trying to unpack it and to say, what's the message that the Holy Father is asking and challenging us to do, and finding the ways that we, as the Catholic leaders, representative of Catholic leaders throughout the country, could make sure that we're bringing that same message back home. But the experience of people being there together for 3 or 4 days, from the Eucharistic procession that took place in absolute silence that was just beautiful on one day, to gatherings of, with Christian rock bands that were helping people to praise the Lord at the end of the days, to the wonderful presentations that were given by keynote speakers of great reputation throughout the country, to amazingly numerous breakout sessions of workshops that people could go to hear more about and to interact with one another. They were all ways of trying to say, how can we bring the joy of the gospel? What the Holy Father keeps reminding us is, our faith is something that isn't just to be kept to ourselves. That faith is something that we're charged.
So I would imagine that what you experienced in Orlando has informed the way that you're going to approach your diocesan priorities. And I mentioned that I'd like to explore those with you a little bit. So I understand that the three goals for this current time in the life of your diocese are vocations, accompanying families toward holiness, and developing missionary disciples. So those are small terms that are packed with lots of meaning, I'm sure. So first of all, why don't you tell us about your efforts to grow the vocations within the diocese? How are you approaching that?
At a time, I talked about my own time of growing up whenever vocations were abundant. We're living at a time when vocations are just the opposite, where there's a shortage of religious vocations, both to the priesthood and religious life. As we were saying a little bit earlier, it's amazing how there are some new charisms of religious vocations that are growing up, and the Lord really does supply when there's a need. And people's lives are being touched in that way. But priesthood, I think, across the board, most parts of the country are experiencing some shortage. There are many dioceses where they're really having a great response right now. Our diocese is still one where we really are trying to find ways of touching people's hearts to respond to the Lord's call. The beautiful first reading for today's Mass, in fact, was the Lord calling Samuel in the Old Testament. And, what Eli's response to Samuel was, when you hear the Lord calling, just simply say, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." That's what I think we're trying to do, is to talk with our young men in particular, in terms of priestly vocations, to have that open heart to what the Lord is certainly asking of them, because there's no doubt that the Lord is still calling.
Yeah.
What we're having difficulty with is having people hearing it and responding with a generous heart to say, well, maybe I'm the one that's to be a priest. So I think just trying to bring that to everyone's attention.
Well, you mentioned earlier that you were happy in your family. And I think that happiness is a characteristic of a good priest. A happy, healthy man is going to be a good, effective priest. And I was struck as I looked at the photos down your hallway of the ordination that you've done. What struck me about all those young men whom you ordained, they looked really happy. They looked really happy. So I'm hopeful that they will be great ministers within your diocese.
Yes. Well, and we continue, of course, to hope and to pray for that as well. So I think the fostering of the vocations is just encouraging people. We're encouraging our parishes to sponsor Eucharistic adoration, times of Eucharistic adoration, particularly just praying for vocations. So it's through prayer, it's through personal encouragement that we're sure that the Lord will we'll continue to see.
Tell us about the diocesan efforts to foster holiness within families.
I think that's probably one of the most important areas that we need to, because it all ties together. If you have a holy family, you're also going to be encouraging vocations, and you're going to result in having missionary disciples, but it all starts in the family. And, I think our families are perhaps struggling these days. I think we live in a time whenever the family is in some ways under attack. Lots of different ways that people can experience family life these days, but having parents and children that live together, that love one another, that experience unconditional love, and do so in a faith-filled environment, there's no more greater way to find holiness for each of those members, but also to have holiness result in the world around them.
And I suspect that the notion of missionary disciples is connected to the joy of the gospel that you were discussing earlier.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that we came back from Florida with, that sense that we really need to proactively encourage people to not just live their faith, that's important, but also to find ways to share faith with one another.
Joyfully.
Joyfully.
Yeah. Well, Bishop, I'm just so grateful that you took this time to be with us. I'm so happy for the Diocese of Kalamazoo that you said yes. Like Mary, you spoke your fiat and have become the shepherd of this wonderful diocese. So may God continue to bless your ministry here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
God bless you.
Bishop Bradley is a man of deep hope who has lived out his commitment to be like Mary, our mother, to always say his fiat, his yes, to what God asks of him. Maybe that's our takeaway from this conversation, to live with unwavering hope and to live with a commitment to say yes to whatever God asks of us. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next edition of Shalom World's Heart Talk.
Jesus said, go out to the whole world and announce the good news. And that's what Shalom is doing. It's bringing the good news of the Holy Spirit in action, renewing the face of the earth so that all people may know how good is the Lord, how beautiful is the work of salvation. Thank you, Shalom, for all you do to reach out, to lead the faith forward. And may Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Shalom World, God's own channel.